All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 148, and today I want to talk about the little things. In particular, I want to talk about miniature-based combat or map-based content, if you want to combat, if you want to use that terminology, in tabletop RPGs. If anyone is kind of scratching their head about what I'm talking about, as far as combat is concerned in a tabletop RPG, there's technically two different versions of combat that can exist. You have what's called theater of the mind, where you have no visual representation of the combat itself. You simply describe the situation, and the players decide, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. On the other side, you have miniature-based combat or map-based content, where you actually have a map. Sometimes they will have a grid, sometimes they will not. The big reason to use a grid-based map is, for the most part, a square will generally represent 5 feet, and most RPGs either 5 feet or 2 yards, depending on, or a meter if you're using in metric measurement. But it's basically around 5 to 6 feet square. And most RPGs will break up their movement and their distances generally in 5 foot or 1 meter or 2 yard intervals, so that it works relatively well with a map. And it means that when players are doing it, they don't have to try and measure anything to figure out how far they can move. They just count the squares. So when we're talking about map-based or miniature-based combat versus theater of the mind, it actually does change your game design philosophies if you are going to favor one over the other. To give a pretty good example, D&D 3rd edition technically did not require the use of maps and miniatures for combat. However, because of all of the different floating modifiers that were entirely dependent on position on the battlefield, it was nearly impossible to run, especially high-level 3rd edition and 3.5 edition D&D games without a map. Because you had to know how many people were in melee. There were situations where you might leave a field on the ground and stuff like that. It really did require a map. And before everyone goes in the comments and goes, no, I played 3rd edition Theater of the Mind, and it was perfectly fine. Theoretically, you can do that. I played 4th edition in Theater of the Mind, and 4th edition specifically made everything in map terms. And I did Theater of the Mind combat in 4th edition. I'm not saying it's impossible. However, the design philosophy behind D&D the 3rd edition effectively assumed that you were going to be using maps and miniatures. And when we got to 4th edition, it threw out the assumption altogether and just said you're going to be using maps and miniatures. Because of that, 3rd edition combat and 4th edition combat are very tactical in the idea that the specific square that you're standing in is extremely important for a number of different reasons. It's going to, especially in 3rd edition, it's going to affect who you can attack, how you can attack them, what modifiers you're going to have when you attack, who can attack you, what areas are going to be in any area of effects. It's a really important thing. And then if you start dealing with things like flanking rules and stuff like that, which I don't believe were optional in the 3rd edition, they have they have flanking rules in 5th edition. They are completely optional, and most people don't know they exist. Again, it's another one of those things that show up in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Dungeon Masters don't read because I'm too smart to read a Dungeon Master's Guide. But yeah, when we go to the other end of this is a spectrum, a good example of combat that doesn't assume and actually game design that actually encourages more theater of the mind combat would be something like Avatar Legends. Avatar Legends is a powered by the Apocalypse game, and the Apocalypse system in general is very story focused, and it tends to be relatively rules light, especially when comparing it to something like Pathfinder or even D&D 5th edition. Apocalypse system based Giga games tend to be relatively rules light. And the one powered by the Apocalypse Giga game that I have the most experience with is Avatar Legends. For Avatar Legends, your specific placement of your character on a map doesn't really matter. You're expected to kind of think about your training and the different moves that you have available, and kind of come up with ways to use those creatively. You're expected to be able to move around the battlefield, because if you watch Avatar The Last Airbender, most of the combat that happens in Avatar The Last Airbender is not two people running up to each other going boom, 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 and then one of them falling down and then moving to the next one. You know, you have people like Aang is like jumping in the air and flying around, and Katara will bring out her water and whip someone away or throw them against a tree and then convert the water to ice. Sokka will throw his boomerang and then, you know, run away to get into a better position. Suki will run through and like trap someone with her fan and then knock them over as Toph comes in and just rips a rock out of the ground and chucks it at someone while also bringing up a rock barrier beside her. Like, it's a very kind of dynamic moving thing, and the way that Avatar Legends expects you to do it is literally just kind of describe the scene that you see in your head, and then come up with a move or a rule that kind of fits the picture that's in your head. Most of the moves are intentionally described very vaguely so they can fit into a lot of situations. The other thing that's unique about Avatar Legends specifically, I don't know if this is all powered by the Apocalypse Giga games, but Avatar Legends specifically, they don't have hit points. You have, I think it's called stress or something similar to that. And you have conditions. And basically the way that your character gets knocked out of combat is you fill up your stress and get all of your conditions marked, and then you're done. There's nothing you can do to do at that point. You're taken out of combat, and the way that works is you narrate a way that you are taken out of combat, and they actually give you a couple different choices that you can make that will have an impact on your character moving forward. So because of that, because Avatar Legends is not really focused on where your character is specifically placed, it also means that trying to run Avatar Legends combat with maps and miniatures starts becoming very frustrating, because you don't have a move speed. There's no flanking, there's no cover, there's nothing like that. So people that want a map and things like that to be very tactical are going to start to get frustrated, because they're like, well, I want to move over here and do this because I can move this far, and then another person is going to literally just go to the opposite side of the field and do something nonsense to go, well, how in the hell did you do that? How do you have that much movement? there's no movement. I'm in the scene. The only kind of positional based advantages is if you are engaged with someone, there are limitations on what you can and can't do, as far as going and dealing with this is someone else. And that's really all it is you are either engaged with someone or you are not engaged with someone. And as soon as you make some sort of movement towards attacking someone, you become engaged with that person. And one of the tips that's given to game masters in the game master section for Avatar Legends is specifically when combat starts, try to effectively pair up combatants. It shouldn't be, 6 people versus, 4 people. It should be these two are fighting each other and these two are double teaming this person and this person is fighting this person. It should be these little kind of paired matchings. Because that's how combat is designed. And again, if you look at the source material, that's generally how it works. It's very, very rare in Avatar The Last Airbender to see 2 groups basically standing up at a line and just throwing attacks at whomever seems the weakest. It will normally always be, okay, I'll take this person, you take that person, and everybody, kind of gets into a combat with someone else. And that doesn't mean that as soon as you get engaged with someone, you have to finish that combat, whatever. There are so many different moves that allow you to effectively disengage, that allow you to kind of trap your opponent so you can go deal with another one. It is a rather dynamic combat system. It's just not designed for maps. Again, from a game design perspective, both of those situations are really fun. I had an absolute blast running Avatar Legends and playing Avatar Legends. I got to play with actually one of my friends running the game, Ilea from Tears of the Realms. She actually ran an Avatar Legend 2-shot effectively, and it was unbelievably fun. It was just some of the greatest fun I've ever had. And for Daily December, couple years ago, I ran an Avatar Legends 1-shot, and it was really, really fun. I had an absolute blast doing it. So that's really, really fun. I also have played really heavy map-focused tabletop RPGs and had an absolute blast. Most of my D&D games now that I have a map making program that allows me to make maps relatively easily, most combat that I run, I will have a map for. Not 100% of the time, but most of the time I will put a map down because it's just easier for me and my players enjoy having the map there. Again, one of the things I used to really love doing way back in the 4th edition days, there were these games called Fourth Core. And basically they were D&D hard mode. And the one, I can't remember the name of it. It was the Fane of something. But basically the plot of this is you had to go to this Fane, which is a temple kind of thing. And I might be using the wrong word because, again, we're going back a decade here. You basically had to infiltrate this kind of temple place and attempt to stop them from summoning this really, really horrible thing into the world that if the entire ritual is completed, game over. Not just game over, oh, you lose this. Game over, the world ends. This is a really, really bad thing. And Fourth Core games were designed to be punishingly hard, like the Dark Souls of D&D. And you were actually encouraged to bring multiple character sheets with you because you weren't going to get long rests in this. In 4th edition, a short rest was only 5 minutes, so you were getting those regularly. But long rests, you just simply were not going to get a long rest. The game that I played, because it was designed for conventions, from the moment the DM started the game, you had 4 real-time hours to get through the adventure. And if you didn't get to the end of the adventure by the time 4 hours hit, the ritual was complete and you lost. and there's actually a scoring system, but it was extremely tactical, and it was so much fun. That was the game where I played my Avenger Sword Mage hybrid that just teleported everywhere and did a surprisingly large amount of damage. So, yeah, it was overall it was it was really really fun. And again, so I can enjoy really tactical based stuff, and I can enjoy theater of the mind stuff. But when we're talking about game design, it is a choice that you need to make. Simply because third edition is a really great example. Can you play third edition entirely theater of the mind? Absolutely. It's not fun to do that, especially as the game master, because you have to have such a perfect mental image of the battlefield in order for everything to work the way that it's designed to, that you really do need to use maps and minis. And so I think one of the reasons why third edition did that was in second edition, people already used maps. People were using maps and minis all the way back in basic D&D. But it was never really a requirement because it didn't get that tactical, to be perfectly honest. Despite the fact that D&D was originally based on miniature wargamings, war games, which are extremely tactical. Basic D&D and first edition and even second edition did a D&D just weren't that tactical. Yes, you had like cones and spheres for your spells and stuff like that, but there wasn't really like firing into melee rules or flanking rules or anything like that. It was significantly less. Despite that, people still used maps and minis because it was fun and it gave them something to focus on. And so by the time third edition came around, I think at that point, Wizards of the Coast was actually selling, or at least Hasbro was. By the way, for anyone that thinks, Hasbro completely ruined did a D&D when they purchased it, they purchased it back in 99, which was before third edition came out. So, no. They've owned Wizards of the Coast and did D&D for over 20 years. I think they're going on it's 25 years this year. So no, the idea that Hasbro somehow ruined D&D has never been true. They've owned it for a long time, and again, third edition, one of the most beloved editions, aside from fifth edition. And when fifth edition came out, again, it's the most popular edition of the most popular tabletop RPG of all time. So, anyway, so from a game design standpoint, if you're looking at making something where you're kind of assuming that your players are going to be using maps and minis, creating more tactical rules is kind of a necessity. Because the players are going to want to have advantage, like high ground advantage, or advantage from flanking, or they're going to want things like attack of opportunity rules and stuff like that. They're going to want to have a reason to go through the extra effort of getting a mini, painting it possibly, and moving around and stuff like that. On the other hand, if you want your combat to be more theater of the mind, having more kind of vague descriptions of abilities to allow players to interpret them into a lot of situations tends to be really valuable for theater of the mind style combat. It allows the players to basically kind of react to the picture they have in their head and the situation that's been explained to them. And it can turn into some really, really fun, interesting stuff. Like I said, the Avatar Legends game that I played in, my character was a firebender whose fighting style was fireworks. They would create these little kind of pop flashes and stuff like that, and they would use it more as a distraction than to actually do damage to people. And so because of that, my character was very, very focused on, doling out conditions to different enemies and giving kind of buffs to different players. And it was really fun to play. And it meant that I just had to go, okay, well, where are we right now? Like one of the places we went to, if I remember correctly, we went to an oasis that Aang and the gang visited in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think it was called like an ice oasis or something like that. They basically had a natural ice spring, which isn't a real thing, but it's a thing in Avatar where ice would just grow out of the ground. And they would use it to make cold drinks with umbrellas in them. And so we got to go there, and so I already had this kind of picture of what that place looked like in my head, and then I could just do fun, interesting things while dealing with it, and it was really, really fun. So anyway, I know one of my biggest issues with, even when I did D&D Adventures Leagues stuff, which, again, the Adventures League is kind of main for mid-maxers, and mid-maxers live for maps and grids. It's something I've talked about a few times. I don't know if I talked about it recently. One of the issues that I see a lot of indie games and a few really big games just kind of fall face first into is the idea of making a rule for everything. That was the design philosophy behind 3rd edition. It's still the design philosophy behind Pathfinder and Pathfinder 2nd edition. Every single thing the players could possibly do, we're going to have a rule for it. And a lot of people mistakenly think that that is an advantage to the GM because they don't have to make things up on the spot. I have seen arguments start on the internet where people talk about how horrible D&D 5th edition is because it doesn't give the DM anything. The DM has to make up everything on themselves. And that isn't true in any way, shape, or form. Again, there's lots of optional rules in the DMG that nobody ever uses. But 5th edition did take a step back to the idea of we're not going to make a rule for everything. And I think one of the biggest reasons why was 3rd edition still is the min-maxers edition. What I mean by that is because there is a rule for everything, min-maxers can take advantage of that. When every time you create more rules, people that are very, very rules focused will find ways to abuse those rules. They will look at particular wordings. They will look at specifically what is not said, especially if you try to be that we have a rule for everything. If there isn't a specific rule stating you can't do this, a lot of people in a system like that will go, well, there's no rule that says you can't, so obviously I can. And that can lead to very annoying situations at the table where the player goes, you know what, it doesn't say that I can't tie great swords to my arms and then just spin around really, really fast and be able to kill everybody within a 10-foot radius. There's no rule that says I can't do that, and logically that should work. Like, I don't have to actually grip them or anything. I just need to have the strength to be able to spin myself, and with my 11 strength, that should be more than enough to spin. So when I used to run D&D Adventures League stuff, even if the module had a map available for it, I would specifically not use it. And I would tell my players when they sat down, I go, hey, by the way, I'm a big fan of Theater of Mind for a couple of reasons. The first of which, I'm a horrible artist, just in general. Like, visual art, never been my thing. If I draw you guys a map, you're not going to be able to understand it any better than I am. So that's one of the things. Second, I've had too many issues. Thank you. Thank you, computer. I've had too many issues with people arguing about maps and trying to use maps going, well, technically I'm not in that square, or technically my cone is touching that square, so I should be able to hit that person. And I'll be like, no, that's not how the spell works. But if I position the cone in this particular way, it goes through the corner of that square, and that means I should be able to hit all 47 of these people with this 15-foot cone. I had effectively stopped for a couple of years. I just stopped doing any kind of mini bases of stuff and ran everything to the theater of the mind, because when I had to deal with min-maxers, and they would go, well, I want to do it in such a way that the square that this person is, I go, there's no squares. This is all theater of the mind. They go, okay. Well, then I want to get them all in my 15-foot cone for my flaming, burning hands. It's not possible. Most of them are further away than 15 feet. So, but if I position myself, you can get 3 of them in a cone really easily, depending on where you want to position your person. But there's no possible way that you can get all 6 of them in your cone. They're spread out too much. And they wouldn't really be able to argue with that, because they're like, but if I do it in this square, there's no squares. I'm telling you that this person is 30 feet away from you, this person is 15 feet away from you, this person is 10 feet away from you, this person is 5 feet away from you. And their relationship to each other, this one's 10 feet from that one's 5 feet from that one. So if you can find a way to make the distance between these characters less than 15 feet or less, I will let you hit them in the same thing. But it is a 15-foot cone. The length of the cone is 15 feet, and the width at the end is 15 feet. There is no possible way that you can cause that cone to hit targets that are further than 15 feet away. There is not a single part of that cone in any way, shape, or form that is bigger than 15 feet. So yes, I was very against miniature-based combat for a while, and then I learned better ways to deal with min-maxers in general, which was to just say no and not argue. But overall, yeah, it's a topic that we haven't covered here yet, despite the fact that I do want to get into the various kind of character class game design discussions. I do want to talk about the idea of, from a game design perspective, do you plan, if you're designing a game, are you planning on it being miniature based? Are you planning on it being theater of the mind based? Because it does massively change how the game is played. The Cypher system is another one that is designed for theater of the mind. And while yes, you can run it with maps and miniatures, it's not particularly difficult. It actually changes how you build your character if you did do that. The reason being, on the Cypher system, unlike most tabletop RPGs that you're expected to use a map and miniatures in, basically most tabletop RPGs you will at least get a move and you will get an action that you can do, and they will generally be separate things. Sometimes you will also get a bonus action or a free action or something else that they want to call it. And the reason why is you're expected to move around the battlefield and do something. The Cypher system, you don't have that. When your turn comes up, you have an action. That's it. That's all you do is you have an action. As part of that action, you can move up to an immediate distance. An immediate distance, they do define in the system, is 10 feet. Because of that, if you use a map in miniatures, combat feels kind of boring. Because you go, well, I can sneeze here. Because your players go, well, wait a minute, I can only move 2 squares and then attack? That doesn't feel good at all. And it really doesn't. So what happens is when you introduce a map in minis, players start taking abilities that allow them to move a short distance, which a short distance is up to, I think it's 50 feet in the Cypher system. I can look it up because I have like a billion different Cypher system things here. Cypher system rulebook. And I'm just going to go to the index here. Index. Let's go D for distance. There we go. Super easy, quick. Distance. Immediate distance, 10 feet or 3 meters. Short distance is 50 feet or 15 meters. Long distance is 100 feet or 30 meters. Very long distance is 500 feet or 150 meters. And then anything else, you just measure it. So there are particular abilities, like if I remember correctly, one of the types, I think it is either the warrior or the explorer, has a first level of ability. Signature war, first year of bash, combat powers, control the field. Nope, I think it's the explorer. Block, danger, stuff to fleet of foot. So there is a ability called Fleet of Foot that you basically you can move a short distance as part of another action. So instead of only being able to move 10 feet, an immediate distance, you can move a short distance, 50 feet, as part of another action, and that actually mimics the kind of regular mini-based combat where most RPGs where you have a movement speed, your default movement is 30 feet. 50 feet's a little bit bigger than that, but it's not an exorbitantly different amount. So normally, people that are familiar with tabletop RPGs will think that when I get into combat, I can move 30 feet and then I can do something. And that has become kind of standard because that's what D&D does. And it's just become so common that even systems that don't really mimic D&D at all will still use 30 feet as your kind of standard movement for your characters. So when you add maps and minis to a Cypher System game, you'll start seeing a lot of players look for ways to get an ability like Fleet of Foot that allows them to move a short distance as part of their action because it feels better. Moving, either choosing to move up to 50 feet or make an attack doesn't feel as good as being able to move 50 feet and attack. So, yeah, like I said, I think it's a topic that you need to think about when you are designing a game, or even just designing features for a game that already exists. Is the idea of, are people going to be using miniatures and maps or not for this? Because if they are, it is in your best interest to design aspects of either the game itself or even just your little bit of content. If you're making a subclass or a class, taking into account that people are going to be looking at a map, put some tactical aspects in there. Will make people more enticed to use it. Whereas if you are designing content for a Theater of the Mind style game, if you put tactical things in there, it's going to become frustrating very, very quickly. Like something as simple as a weapon that shoots a projectile that effectively has like a piercing version of it where it can hit targets behind that. Simply phrasing it to like, when you hit a target with this, it will also do damage to any targets directly behind that are within 10 feet behind the target in a straight line from the target, or anything like that when you're talking about a straight line or something like that. Because then the players have to think, okay, well, now I'm not so much thinking about, the picture in my head. I'm trying to figure out angles and geometry and trigonometry in that. And when there's a map there, it's very easy. You just take a line and you draw it. When there's no map, it starts to become very, very frustrating. Or abilities that activate when something comes within a certain distance. That can get really, really annoying in a Theater of the Mind, because in a in a map situation, if you have something like that that will activate when people come within 10 feet of you or something, you will position your characters so that any of the enemies have to somehow go through that area to get to any of your allies. Whereas Theater of the Mind, you can go, well, I want to try and interpose myself so that no one can get to my friends. And then everybody at the table has to kind of agree, well, how is the battlefield set up? How can people get around the battlefield? Can they fly over you? It starts becoming significantly more complicated. So, yeah. So, question for you guys. First of all, do you prefer map-based combat or miniature-based combat, or do you prefer Theater of the Mind style combat? Like I said, I've played both. I love both, but they do scratch very different itches. So let me know in the comments down below. And in addition to that, do you think that there is a system out there that does one or the other system really, really well? I'm going to tell you right now, if you say Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you're wrong. It doesn't do it very well because the system itself is so overly complicated that it's just not fun. Anything other than that, I would love to hear other systems you guys feel does either map-based combat really, really well or Theater of the Mind combat really, really well. Because, again, I love to learn about new systems. Otherwise, that is going to be all for me today, and I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.